So this next project is going to be with an ex-coworker, Alex. It's to make a kind of like a casino chips tray, but for little metal space money. So one of the games that he used to play had little metal space money, and he has a bunch of it that he uses for some of the games that he does, and he wants to have a nice little box to put it in. So the goal is to make this orientation like that with little slots so that they can all stand up in and sit. So that's what's next. Let's see what I can come up with. The sizing should be interesting. He wants it's only going to be a short little box because these aren't very big, and so he wants little slots that each of the different denominations fits in like this, and then have them on be able to slightly tilt back and forth. Crazy, boring, specific stuff. So I'm trying to work on the tray for the little metal money, and based on the sizes that we got, the largest thickness of stack probably 1 3/4. That should give us enough space, hopefully, for everything to fit. I mean, that's 1.74, which is almost there, so I'm hoping that'll work. We'll see. So yeah, so then I have to figure out the sizes and the widths, and so that's what this crazy paper is that probably is not visible on the screen. But basically, figure out the width of the coins or the money, figure out the width, add a little bit of space because we have to have space for the felt to go in, and then go from there for the widths, and then figure out the decimal equivalents, and then convert those back into regular fractions, and then try and figure it out. So there, first there was the making of the lid. I already had the pieces cut for other projects and didn't use it for that. So here I'm working on the pieces of yellow wood for the lid. So I'm using the blue tape method for clamping, and it ended up working pretty good. Usually it does if you get it correct. So I got the tape in place, get it all sorted, and then you just weight it down, and then you go for there. And now I'm cutting the sides, also out of yellow wood, and that's going good. And just for Mike, I know that nobody else may or may not care, but I'm doing the time lapses slower. It's only 8 times speed versus 32 times speed, so it's going to make a longer video, but hopefully it'll be fine. And now we're doing box joints on the sides. So that's good, because that seems to work really well for the boxes. So just going through and getting all that sorted. So yeah, there we go. And they're all labeled, and they should be good. Oh, that was the last corner maybe. And then it's good. It's in a very rough state. There's the lid for the money box. It has nice grain in it. It's the yellow wood, and there's the inside. This is too tall. It's easier to do box joints in a slightly wider piece. Get it all glued together, then I can cut it down and have it fit, because it only has to be about half that high. So next is glue up the sides. Alright, now that the lid is glued up, I have to get it all flattened out. Anytime you glue a panel up, if there's the least bit misalignment, you have to sand it so it's flat. So running through the drum sander is great for that. It not only can take the glue off, but make sure that it's all the same thickness. And I'm so glad I got that. And now I'm running through the side pieces plus some extra pieces just to get them all the same thickness. That way I have some spares if needed. And then we got to change the sandpaper from the rough grit to the finer grit. That way we don't, because anytime you're gluing sides together, you want to have the least amount of sanding on the interior, because it's very much a pain to get a sander in there. So now that we've done the rough grit, we're doing the finer grit, and then you can see as once in a while I open it up and clean it, and that's all better. And now to try and keep the super glue from staining the wood in the corners, I'm going and putting tape along the edges. It's a lot more work, but it saves on cleanup. And then get it all in place, and I have them numbered so I know which corner is supposed to go where. So that's all good. And then one at a time, get them all lined up good. And then once they're all lined up pretty good on all the 4 corners, we go through and we glue things. And I'm using the thin super glue for this, and that seems to work fairly well. I've had good luck with it at least. And again, just going through one at a time, and then once it's all done with the clamps, go through it again, And then once that's all sorted, we will get ready and we will cut off the little tabs that stick out. And that makes it a bit nicer. And then we take the tape off and see how we did. And it takes a while to get off because it was a lot of tape. And then you work on cleaning up the little bits of tape. And now we're doing some sanding on the outside. And hopefully there wasn't too much on the inside. But the reason the outside needs done is because you have to sand off the final bits for where those little nubbins were. And now I'm cutting the pieces for the lid framework. And then trimming those to size. And because there's those slots in there, because this was a piece of a kid's bed rail for a crib, I was trimming that off and figuring out what size things need to go, and it turns out that's not going to work because the lid is a little bit thicker than that. So I'm trying to get it all perfect. And then here, all right, there we go. So we're going to get the lid, the side slices in for where the lid goes. And now I'm cleaning out those bottom slots and then making little pieces to fit in there, because those bottom slots were just wide enough that they weren't going to look even when they slid down over the sides. Let's see if I can get the lid to show. The lid's going to be really cool for this box. So I'm using these pieces of bed rail from that kid's crib again for the top, and the top will fit very nicely on the lid. And then the plan is to have a slot that will fit, and this time I'm remembering to do it before I cut it all off, to have a slot that will fit down over the side, and then that will be the lift off lid. So the whole lid piece will lift off. It will be thicker because we want some depth to the lid itself. So that will work out. Because these pieces again are repurposed, they have these dowel slots and such, and I don't want that. So what I figured out is if I cut a slot that wide, I had a piece of maple also from that same frame. I put that down in the slot, glue that in, and then that will be a nice solid piece the entire length. So the goal is to stick that down in there, a little bit sanded narrower, so that's why that goes in. So I need to widen it just slightly. So the goal is put that down in there, glue that in, and then I will have a nice solid piece the entire way down, be maple, and then I can cut the slot, and hopefully the slot won't be quite as deep, so you will just see maple there instead of holes and such that were left. So now that I have that figured out, I'm cutting to size so that those bottom slots completely disappear, and then I have pieces of wood that will fit in there, and now I'm gluing those all in, and that will be good. And then once those are glued and clamped, those spacer blocks are glued, and now we just wait for that to dry. Now that the spacer blocks are dried, I can go and cut them back to the proper height, meaning cut the extra off because they were sticking out, and do that on all those pieces. Alright, so now I'm cutting the rest of those pieces off so that they fit for the lid trim. And here we're cutting the side grooves to make sure that's going to work and get that all sorted. And then we are cutting the lid to size because it was way bigger than it needed to be. So we're getting that to the rough sizing such that it's going to fit with the side pieces. And then we are trimming the corners on the lid trim to be 45s, so we get nice 45 corners. And that's a lot of back and forth, but it works. I'm so glad I got that slicer. It's super dangerous because they're super sharp blades, but boy does it work nice for doing exact corners on things. This box had a lot of really nice exact corners because that made it so much better. So I found that using that hand miter saw to get them close, and then using the slicer gets it that last little bit so that it works really nice. And then test to make sure that the lid's going to go, and then just keep working along. And there we go. We're getting 3 sides down, 1 to go. And as you see, it fits down on the sides nicely. And there we go. Alright, now do the final bare trimming of the lid so that it will fit in the box, and that is all good. And now we will tape that up such that it's going to be ready to glue. That was good. Now it's gluing. This video was made over the course of many weeks, so yeah. It came out so nice at the end though. And here just making sure that the corners are all nice and tight whenever it glues. And lid is now glued together and fits down over. The lid will fit either way, which is important. So now that I've gone through all the other two failed methods for the lid inside stuff, for where the coins go, I'm cutting down and getting a piece of pine to the right thickness and then widths to use for the little tiny wooden boxes. So these are 3/8 inch thick or tall little tiny slats that I'm making lots of little slices. They're not just little boxes, they're little, mostly custom-sized boxes. Because none of the little metal money is the exact same size. So some of them are similar width, some of them are not. Some of them are similar height, some of them are not. I can't just make one the same, I have to make each one individually. And now that we have all the pieces, we are going to try and cut them. I noticed that it was too big for the miter saw, the little tiny slices. So just cutting with the little cutoff saw on a piece of wood worked better, and then using the little angle cutter. Because again, these are 3/8 inch tall and between 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches in sizing. And I'm cutting them with 45 degrees on the ends. So that gives it about 1/8 of an inch, or I think 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch apart would give you enough distance to get the 45 degree. And I had done, as I think I showed, I had done testing that the 45 degree holds better. I have one. I think I'm going to need way more of the little strips cut. Luckily I have a bunch of wood. I didn't want to cut it all up into strips until I was sure this was going to work. I think this is going to work. The only issue is it's hard to hold them completely square. It's a nice strong little thing. That's what I needed. Something that's basically the size I want and that's strong enough to deal. Alright, so working on cutting the little pieces. And I eventually found out, after I got all this done, that the very top two next to the thin slot were too big, so I had to cut them down. I don't think I did that on camera, because same operation, I just trimmed the size down so they were half the height they were, because there was a misunderstanding on my end of how big those were supposed to be. But all the other ones should be right. And yeah, just going, and here's the process. Those two lines, the outside one was the spot where you leave space, and then the inside one was where you do the angle. So, and then I realized that to glue these up, the best way to do it is get tape on them. And the problem is the tape is half the height, or I should say the tape is twice the height of the little boxes. You got to tear the tape in half to do, and that's always fun. And then just go around and super glue a bunch of them without gluing your fingers to the tape. And then take all the tape off. And that worked pretty good. And even though I didn't use that piece of plastic, it was good for sizing and just getting the stuff close. Because that was one of the pieces of plastic that I was initially going to use for the second failed insert piece, but decided that wasn't going to work. So now we got the little wood pieces. And here I'm just going through and getting all the super glue off all the corners and filing the insides to make sure everything's all good. So between the two sanding blocks and the little file, let's manage to get all those cleaned up fairly well. And for some of them, I did run into spots where, hey, that needs a little bit more glue. Now we're getting to the bottom piece. So I used a piece of plywood, put tape on it so it doesn't tear out, and then cut it to size. And that ends up being a nice friction fit in the bottom, so that's awesome. And now here we're getting ready to set up, and so you can see I now have smaller boxes for the little top two. And I'm putting tape down because I wasn't 100% sure this was going to work with this setup, so I wanted the ability to take it back off. So super glue on tape is easier to remove than wood to that plastic. Wood to that plastic just holds permanently, but super glue was better. So I got that all spaced and measured and got it all glued. And now it's time to do the felt. I was able to use the felt that I cut up with the second attempt with the foam. There's another video that explains that. I didn't put that in here because it would have been way too long, and I already had a video on it, and it was a failed attempt, so it wasn't really needed. So here we're getting all the stuff cut up, and before I actually glue it down, I'm making sure that it just fits, and then I can glue it down later, or I should say take the backing off and actually stick it later. But first I'm making sure that it's all going to work size-wise. And yeah, that little block of wood did a lot of cutting on there. And I'm glad I put a lot of extra on that little tiny slot, because it turns out I had to pull the, this was later, but I had to pull that up and narrow it with some extra pieces of wood because the piece of money that goes in that slot was falling out. And so I'm glad I had enough extra to do that. But yeah, just going through and getting each little piece cut and set and fit in place. And yeah, and some of it I had to cut off because it was a little bit too long. And there, I didn't make you watch all of it, but I figured well, you can watch the end pieces. So yeah, got all that in. That's all good. Oh, and there it's actually, there I'm actually gluing it down. So this is actually gluing it down at this point, taking it off and gluing it, or I should say sticking it. I think the third attempt's going to work. I have the little indentations super glued down onto tape on the plastic. Next step is get the lid more finalized, so I'm running it through the drum sander to, get those edges all cleaned up. And these are the pieces that are going to go in between as cover pieces, little pieces of maple. And then just cutting some of those up to get them to the right width. And I had to cut another piece. Alright, now they should be all the right size. Oh, I was also cutting a piece of pine there. So some of I'm doing a thicker piece of pine in between all the little boxes. And some of the little pieces, instead of trying to use the sandpaper, I used the plain, and that worked so much better, and it was nice and quick. Alright, so now that I have felt in and I have little spacer pieces cut such that if you put a board above that, there's enough space that the felt has room, but it will cover things up kind of like that, so that will cover things up, and then I can round the edges and such on these to make it a nice edge. I needed some more maple that was wider than the strips I already had, and these were some of the braces from that dresser I took apart, so I cleaned the glue off of those and got it ready to trim up. And here I'm trimming one in half basically, or pretty close, and then ran it through, and yeah, it's pretty much the same thickness. So then I'm just working to clean that up such that they're the right thickness and the same thickness and all that. And here I am doing another small piece because I needed some other small chunks for in between the slots. And I'm so glad I have this bandsaw. That makes things like that so much easier. Or maybe, that was actually for the outside trim piece. I needed the thin piece. That's what that was. And then get the little felt corners in around everywhere. What's worse than working on little tiny boxes? Working with little tiny dots of felt to fill in the corners of the little tiny boxes. That'll look better though, because this way, when we have boards come across, if there's anything, this way I could have it sit back slightly and you can actually see the corners versus it just showing as raw wood. I cut these in half. That way I can put them on the sides and still have hopefully space that the lid will slide just down past it. Now to work on cutting and gluing all the pieces for the cover section. So the cover is to cover up all the spots in between the little felt cups and getting that all fit correctly. And so yeah, just working getting maple cut for all those bits, and then trying to get it sized and make sure they're all straight. And again, that cutter's awesome. If you ever have a need for doing those kinds of custom fits, get one of those cutters. It's expensive, but it's worth it. You can get such exact spots filled in, and yeah, it's just awesome. And now I am working on taping things up for the outer frame. Now that I have all the pieces basically sized, or at least some of the pieces sized, I have to have the frame glued in before I can get everything else for the exact sizing and the links and such. So that all looks like it's going to work. So then I glue up the corners of that without gluing it to my square. And then make sure it's all good. Make sure it still fits. Glue the other corners. That's all good. Alright, and then file it, and then make sure it's going to go. And I have other pieces of that little thin pine that are going under that eventually. But now that I have that sized, I can work on getting the sizes of the pieces for the cross pieces and the other little pieces that fit in. And again, lots of little fiddly cuts, but with that cutter I could get it sized exact. So it was not stressing or bending the frame, but it was basically fitting in perfect. And then just getting it so that it all works size-wise, so those are all good. And then figure out where they're going to go. And then tape some of that in place such that I can, get the final locations sorted, because now that I have that direction, I'm going to need to cut the other direction. So yeah, get that all sorted. And yep, looks pretty good so far. As you saw, I got these cut to length. I want a little bit of the felt showing on each side of the cross pieces. That way there's a little bit of space for the coins and they're not rubbing on the wood. Alright, cut some other little bits because I needed some other pieces for slightly different thicknesses. Basically, some of those pieces were just a little bit too wide. They weren't as narrow as I needed. So I trimmed those down and then glued those pieces in. Now that those side pieces are glued in, and the horizontal pieces are glued in, I will be able to have the exact distances for the vertical pieces. So that's all good. And now I can work on getting the little pieces cut up and sorted for the vertical pieces. And again, that trimmer is so nice because some of these pieces were so tiny, and getting them just exact was just, yeah. It was a lot of specific work, but with these tools, even though it took a while, it was very possible, and it turned out awesome. So, yeah, just go through in each piece. Now let's, get the exact sizing, cut it a little bit oversized with the saw, and then go back and forth on the trimmer till it fits perfect. And that's going good. And yeah, it was a lot of intense concentration to make sure I get that right, because especially with using reclaimed wood, you only have so much of it, right? So I have to use the stuff I have appropriately so I don't waste any of it. And this all worked. It came out awesome. And yeah, now that it's all taped up, I can go ahead and glue those other pieces. So that's good. And using the activator and then making sure it's all good. And gluing it from the other side just to be sure. Alright, that doesn't look too bad. There's still more steps to do, but I got the pieces all glued together. These little tiny squares were definitely a challenge. Good news is, that thing works great. I was able to cut some of the things widthwise because I needed to trim this one down, for example, narrower than this. And there's no way I want to use something that tiny on the table saw. This thing worked. It wasn't too long to go in that slot. It worked to cut widthwise and lengthwise, and it cuts the edges nice and sharp. Now that's glued up. Got to get it sanded, because again, you want to make sure it's flat and looks good. Get it so it's perfect, and then go in and sand and file all the little corners. And then put some of the clear lacquer on, because I needed that sized correctly so I could do some of the sizing later. So, and here, this is the little frame that's going to go under that top piece.
that fits tightly around the little cups. So glue it up, sand it, and see there, it's a friction fit down over there. And the goal being, I guess I hadn't glued those down. I was just doing the felt pieces before. So the section where I said I was gluing those down, I was cutting the little corner pieces of felt that whole section, not gluing it down. Because there I'm gluing the wood down. And there I'm making sure that that's all set correctly. And I need to cut some more pieces because I'm doing some edge pieces around there of that same nice maple.
So this is where we're at so far. I got the lid put with finish on. I used clear lacquer, crystal clear lacquer from Watco. Put that on the top and bottom of the lid so the lid looks nice. Then the lid comes off, and then you have the yellow wood sides, and that's kind of what it's going to look like. I'm going to have I used figured maple for this top bit, and that covers up the in-between section for where the coins go. And then I'm going to put the offcuts of similar thin maple around the edges, and then when you look down in, you'll see something like that. Obviously with this much shorter. The sides are only going to come up maybe an inch or so, and that's how the lid fits into the sides. Alright, now you can see the figure a little bit better. It's figured maple on the sides, this part, all the little bits.
Alright, now it's time to cut those little super thin, I think they're 16th inch thick, edge pieces to size. So basically I need that to be a friction fit inside the box. So it has to be a little bit bigger than those. And now I drew lines on them, and I'm cutting them with the bandsaw to approximate thickness. And then I'm using my little sander to get them down to the line. Another way to do this, my friend Mike said, was use the table saw, but this was quicker. I didn't have to play with the table saw or sticky double-sided tape. This worked.
I got the little pieces cut to width. I need these little pieces to cover up the plastic.
Alright, now they're cut for width. Now we're going for length and final fit inside the box. So again, we want a friction fit so that this holds nicely. So again, same as before. Just whack the end off, sand to make sure it's all good.
Well, there's one more step done. Now we have the maple edge around the outside, so that should be good.
Alright, now we got everything sized. It is time to get it glued up and fit so it just is in its final shape. So get all these put in place and try and tape them to make sure they stay where they're supposed to be. And make sure it's actually going to fit the way I want it to. And I got that in. Because again, this has to be a friction fit, so everything has to be exact. And that looks pretty good. So get that all in so we can glue it without causing problems. And then we go and glue along the edges. So first was glue the outer frame to that inner frame, or the outer pieces to that inner frame. And then it's a lot of going around, but you want to make sure it works. And then get the tape off. And should be good. Alright, next it's going to glue this top bit on. So put a couple drops to make sure it's held, and then just go along and get it sorted. It's a lot of work. Don't screw it up. Don't glue your fingers to it. I did avoid doing that. I did not glue my fingers to anything important or anything not important. So now we're going to test it. It should be a friction fit, and it snaps down over. That's very cool. That's what it's supposed to do.
All right, I think that's going to work. So here's how it currently goes together. So we have the sides. This was a board that is basically a friction fit, and this drops down in, and then this drops down in over top, and that fits. And then this is the wrong direction, but I don't have enough that are the same width to go the other way. When they're like this, you can pull them out and use them, which I think will be fine. This sticks up far enough past this frame that you can get them out. That's about how they would be. Yeah, you can get them up out. Even if they're stacked, you can pull them sideways enough to get them up out. Because I didn't want to have this stuff such that I had to spray finish where the felt is, because I don't mess up the felt. So this way, I can completely finish this piece, the over frame, get that all finished. I can do finish on the sides, set this all together, and then not have to worry about messing up the felt.
Of the extra yellow wood into the width I need for the bottom trim And that works.
Had to do one adjustment. So initially I had the 100,000 coin slot much wider. Basically, I had to add two more of these little boards on each side under the felt to keep it more upright, because otherwise I made some equivalent pieces of board as if it had a bunch of the coins. I added the thin plastic as a spacer on all of those, and then I put the lid on and turned it upside down and moved it around while holding it shut. And with it 3 wide, this thing kept falling out and ending up elsewhere. With it 2 wide, it ended up falling out and going elsewhere. Now that I have it this wide, which it realistically only had to be that wide, it's just I couldn't make the little box that big to actually glue it together, so I just have 2 little pieces stuffed in behind the felt. So if I have this much spacing between the coins and the lid, they jiggle around slightly, but they don't go anywhere. Now that I have that figured out, I can put these in like this. Okay, the lid goes on there like that, and then put it down. What that means, assuming those little plastic pieces didn't move, this is the height of the bottom, which means I have these little edging pieces to put around the inside to do 45s in the corners. With these little edge pieces figured out, I now know how high the sides are supposed to be. With all that, finally get to the point where I can cut the sides to height and then finish the box.
Okay, now I know how tall the sides are supposed to be. So I'm working on getting that cut to size, and that plan with the little extra piece, I probably should have done it on the last side because it was a little bit off. But anyway, sand it to the right height. Luckily, I had cut it a bit oversized. So sand it down, that should be good. And now I'm trimming the bottom trim pieces that go on the inside such that they're, again, friction fits. And that came out awesome too. So again, just these kind of things, they take a while, but if you take the time, it works so nice. So cut it to rough length with the saw, and then clean it up down to exact with the little cutter. And yeah, just get those all in place, and then keep going. And it's working good. Get the last piece in. There it is.
And now I have the inner part of the base sorted. So what that means that I can now take the bottom piece, that in there, and that's how that's supposed to go. And then take this part, that in there, and that's how that's supposed to go. And then theoretically, this goes on like that, and that's how that's supposed to go.
Alright, now that that's all sorted, I can glue in the bottom. And that's all good. Getting it all in, super glued, nice, and get all the little cracks. Luckily that's thin super glue because it would not have gone in those joints otherwise. And then just run it through to clean up for the bottom edge, and then we're all good there. And then after a bit more of the lacquer, this came out awesome. Inside, bottom, top, everything's awesome.
Alright, let's see how well this works outside. The box is done for the little coins. For finish, I used a combination of the triple thick varathane polyurethane and the Watco crystal clear lacquer. This is kind of how the coins are supposed to go. So we have the 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500, and then these top two are for 1000s, and then this very top one is a 100,000 slot. So we'll start from the bottom. This is the inside. Piece of nice plywood for that part, little badge. The sides and the bottom trim are yellow wood, and we got nice tight joints for the corners. We got the box joints, and the yellow wood looks really cool. And then we have this. So with the spacing, in order for these to not fall out when you turn it over, I have little pieces of Velcro that may or may not get used. I left that as an option, but when you put that in, and that fits down the whole way, that goes in and that gives the proper spacing. And then we have this part, the overlay piece, and it's of figured maple for all the bits and sections. So that looks really cool. But then what you do, this goes down over and snaps and clips in place. So then you can see you have space around the different sections so that the coins can come up in and out just fine. And that's all good. And then for the lid, the center panels are figured yellow wood, which that's really cool. And then maple edges. And that's really cool. And then again, you can see on the inside the figured yellow wood and the maple. So for the top, it has this deep slot to fit down over this edge and into this trough. And then when that's on, it goes down like that. And then theoretically, well, all the individual ones will fall, but I'm hoping that the 100,000 one does not fall. And oh look, the 101,000 one did not fall. The reason these fell out is they're supposed to be set up. Let's see if I can get this to work. They are supposed to be set up such that each little trough is pretty much full. And when they're full, assuming I can pick these out, and we'll put the extra ones in just so it fills up. Alright, so they're supposed to be more like that instead of just flat. And then when this goes on, they stay. So yeah, I think that's going to work really nice. And again, the benefit of doing it this way for the removable tray, I don't know that the person who's getting this, Alex, hey Alex, I don't know if he's going to want to ever remove this and just use this as a box for something else. But this way, there we go. This way, theoretically, if you just wanted this as a box for something else, it would be a box for something else. So that way with the spacing all works, and the Velcro is optional if you want to stick it. I don't think it's going to fall apart. So you can see the sides. That's how it fits down over. And that works really cool. Yeah, I think it's going to work really nice. And again, it's supposed to go this way. I think it should work just fine. And this goes down over. Let's do it the easy way. Take those out. Then it goes down on. And this doesn't, well, it shouldn't fall out. Yeah. So it is a friction fit for this part in there. So, yeah. There is the box. I think it looks completely amazing. The grain is just awesome and it catches the light. And it's very, very cool. So, there we go. All done.